I'm Al McClue, Conversations with Al McFarlane. Glad to be here and glad to have you along. Today, we talk with business leaders, often political leaders, and a mix. Today, I'm pleased to have joining us momentarily Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. Later in the there he is. Keith, how you doing, man?
Great.
Later in the program, we're going to be joined by two dear friends of mine, in memory of another dear friend, Hawana Sullivan Jansen is the niece of Lucille Williams, who was the proprietor of Lucille's Kitchen, the famed Lucille's Kitchen in North Minneapolis, where we had this program originate for a number of years. She'll be joining me to talk about her aunt and about our community. But first, Attorney General Keith Ellison, thank you, my friend, for being here. Thank you for your work. And I got a press release that I call massive breaking news. You have announced yesterday that you have executed or prosecuted a case against Minneapolis landlord Stephen Meldahl, who you say knowingly and in bad faith violated the rights of 267 families who rented from him, primarily in North Minneapolis. And that this follows a 7-day or 8-day trial on your claims, the state's claims that he falsely represented to his tenants that he could prevent them from having their homes inspected by the city of Minneapolis. And he would charge them late fees greater than 8%, which are prohibited under Minnesota state law. Let me stop there and ask you to talk about, to describe to the viewers and listeners here what this case was, why it was important, and what outcomes you produced. And then finally, before you leave, you got a hard stop at the bottom of the hour. I want to take 4 or 5 minutes to talk about your other breaking news. You've announced that you're running again for the office of Attorney General, state of Minnesota. So that's important news as well.
Well, let me just ask you to complete a series: food, clothing, and
housing, shelter.
Right.
There we go.
They're basic necessities every person has to have. And in this case, there are a lot of people who don't have anywhere to live. We've got to do something about the homeless population. But then there are a lot of people who have somewhere to live, but because the housing market is so tight, the rental market is so tight, some landlords think, I don't have to do anything for you. I wouldn't tie a dog up in that place, but you can live there for a very high price. And if you don't like it, get out and I'll find somebody else to take advantage of. Well, let me tell you what the court said. This is not Keith Ellison. This is the court that had heard all the evidence. And here's what they said in the order that the court issued after hearing all the evidence. The court heard extensive testimony from numerous former Meldahl tenants describing living conditions in their rental units that can only be described as appalling. Infestations suggestive of biblical plague proportions. Wow. Squirrels, mice, rats, gnats. Tenants being resigned to simply keeping the bathroom door closed to try and isolate a squirrel infiltration. Ongoing water damage, destroying property, one instance even causing a ceiling collapse. A common, credible refrain from tenants was of a landlord that was alternatively unresponsive or blamed the tenants for the problems. The court heard testimony about a landlord who had a tortured relationship with the truth and who would make up stories to try and deflect tenants. Meldahl has repeatedly bragged about his record of evicting a large portion of his tenants. Meldahl's efforts to paint himself as a gruff, talking benefactor, making rental properties available to those lacking credit to get approved for leases elsewhere, rang hollow given the horrible rental conditions described and his seeming indifference to his tenants' plight. Next paragraph, and I'll be quick. The testimony offered at trial paints a picture of It's a Wonderful Life. Henry F. Potter, the unapologetic villain of the film, unconcerned with a despised landlord, owner of a Pottersville slum empire. So you and I remember It's a Wonderful Life. Yep. Maybe younger listeners don't know. One more little piece I want to leave with you. Meldal, this is the order. This is the court's order issued into court. Anybody can read it. Meldal owns and operates numerous residential properties, mainly single-family homes, targeted at low-income tenants, particularly in North Minneapolis. So there you go. This guy, and by the way, I saw the testimony. Mostly it was Black women and their kids.
Okay. How did this case come to your radar? You executed this prosecution, right?
Yes, absolutely. If you read the front of it, it says State of Minnesota by its Attorney General Keith Ellison versus Stephen Meldal.
Okay.
So yeah, this is a case that we brought, and it's a good question. How did the AG end up with it? Because normally, Al, the Attorney General does not do landlord-tenant cases. It has historically been the province of legal aid or someone else, but it came to our attention. Well, first of all, when I ran in the first place, I left Congress after 12 years. Your paper endorsed me a few times, and not a few times, every time. And I left, and a lot of people were like, "Well, what are you leaving Congress for? Isn't Congress like the big leagues? Isn't that the major leagues, dude? What are you coming back to the minors for?" Well, I wasn't. I was going to the front line. I was going to the front line of the battle. That's what I was doing. And so the bottom line is this. When I ran for AG, I said I wanted to do two things: help people afford their lives, and then help everyone live with dignity, safety, and respect. Having a place to live, having a shelter is the very heart and soul of affording your life. If you can't have a place to live, you can't meet other basic necessities. You can barely you can't hold a job homeless. It's very difficult. People sometimes do it living out of their cars and such, but it is extremely difficult. If you don't have an address, anyway, so I decided that housing, we're going to break from the past and do something that attorneys generally don't do. We were going to do housing cases, but we weren't going to do every little housing case. We're going to look for chronically bad landlords. And when they had like more than 10 or so properties and they were messing over a lot of people, then we're going to do something. The smaller ones, we can let legal aid do those. But the bigger ones, the systemic offenders and abusers, we're going to do something about that. This same guy ignored over 1,000 inspection orders over the course of time. So he was used to just telling the city of Minneapolis to, kick rocks or something. Right. But we were like, no, we're going to do.
So how does a guy like that operate with impunity? I mean, how does it happen? That's number one. How can, or is that par for the course, how it's always been?
Well, I will say that Minnesota has laws written favorably for landlords. But there's a lot of good landlords who, still don't try to get away with stuff. They try to, they try to do the best that they can for people, right? This guy took the opposite. His attitude was, I'm going to do whatever I can do and get away with whatever I can get away with. And you can find me, but I'm not going to pay. And he was just that guy. He was that very difficult guy. And we need to have better laws, because even though we've won this case and he's going to have to pay a lot of money, he's going to have to pay over $135,000 in fees and civil fines, but he's also going to have to pay fees, legal fees and things like that. But what he's not going to have to pay, and which I'm very upset about, is that he's not going to have to pay restitution for the pain and suffering of these victims. He will have to comply with all inspection orders from the city, part of the win. So this was us, the city, and the state teaming up. I will tell you that Councilman Ellison was very helpful in getting this done. So that was a good thing. But the fact is, if you can ignore an inspection order, if you can fight the fines, if you can avoid paying them, if you know how to game the system, there's a lot of bad things you can do and get away with. But here's the thing, Al. The Minnesota Statutes that governs the Attorney General's office says the Attorney General shall investigate violations of law of this state respecting respecting unfair, discriminatory, or other unlawful practices in business, commerce, or trade, and specifically, but not exclusively. And then it cites various statutes around unfair discrimination and competition, unlawful trade practices. And I would say that renting an apartment is certainly within the realm of unfair, discriminatory, or otherwise unlawful practices in business, commerce, or trade. So we just interpreted the law more broadly to make sure that, we could enforce it in a way that worked for people, that people needed. So that's what we've tried to do.
You filed another consumer protection lawsuit against the landlord in August, I believe. It was against Shearholtz and Associates for charging the residents of Broadmoor Valley Manufactured Home Park in Marshall unlawfully high late rent fees and persistently failing to maintain the park and its roads to the standards required by law. So you've been paying attention to the conditions and the needs, protecting renters, residents, either in the city, North Minneapolis, but also Marshall, Minnesota.
That's right.
Kate, it seems to me you're sending a shot across the bow to all of the people in that community, saying that there's a standard that you expect and that citizens expect business people to live up to, because they expect residents to live up to standards as well. And it's a fair exchange, but you got to be fair.
Well, let me tell you this, think about all the landlords who say, I'm going to provide housing at a fair price and at a good quality for everybody. Mm-hmm. They've got to compete with these people like Mildahl and this guy who owns Broadmoor Valley. They've got to compete against the worst. Imagine trying to make an honest dollar as a landlord when your competition knows no boundaries, will do anything, and will abuse people. And so that's your competition. You're losing money to this guy because he's not honest and you are. So, of course, we're enforcing the law to help tenants, but we're also enforcing the law to help honest business people. Mm-hmm. We believe that both are critical. And we're grateful for the landlords who say, you know what? I know it's going to cost me money to replace that, but I'm going to replace it because I don't want anybody's kids living in an unsafe condition. I don't want anybody. I mean, I take pride in the properties that I rent. And for those landlords too, we step out there and we fight on their behalf. And, right now, Minneapolis is a very tough rental market, but the whole state is, and there's nowhere we won't go. I live in North Minneapolis. I raised my kids here. So people think of me as a North Minneapolis guy, and I am a North Minneapolis guy, but I'm the statewide attorney general. So we are in Worthington and we'll be anywhere and we'll be anywhere across the state of Minnesota to protect renters. And in the course of the pandemic, we were enforcing the moratorium on evictions all over the state, all over the state, Sandstone, Minnesota, Northern Minnesota, wherever it is, because we're not going to let people be thrown out of their shelter when they need it most, right? And we told people,
Thinking of protecting renters, both Minneapolis and St. Paul passed rent control measures.
Right.
Where do you stand on that, and what's going to happen to the benefit of present renters, and what's going to happen to, as the landlords or the developers say, they feel that they are being disadvantaged by this policy? That's debatable, but how does it look to you?
Well, my own thought is these charter measures were brought about because tenants couldn't survive on these precipitous rent increases, and so I think that the folks in the property renting community need to ask themselves, did we go too far? Did we take too much? Did we put ourselves in a situation where people would react this way? So often people in power, and landlords do have power over tenants, make no mistake about that. They take and take and take, and then they're shocked when somebody turns around and says, wait a minute, we have to do something about this. The tenants recognize that they were the numerical majority, more tenants than there are landlords. And the landlords, lost that one, in my view, because they would not be fair and reasonable with the tenants.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's my opinion. I think that what they need to do is get into a conversation with groups of tenants and say, what are we going to do? Because if they say, look, we'd like to build more, but we can't build more unless we can make more, and this charter prevents that, my answer would be, well, then, look for some sort of a public subsidy or something, because people cannot pay more than 30% of their income in rent. And everybody knows rent eats first. Rent eats first. Rent comes before food. Rent comes before medicine. Rent comes before anything.
Mm-hmm.
And if you tell people, well, I got you over a barrel, and so I'm going to apply my advantage, that's wrong. And a lot of landlords do try to be fair. I don't want to paint with a broad brush. I know good landlords, and I just want to say that, to them, but some folks, just be honest with you, they don't live in Minneapolis. They don't live in Minnesota. They don't live anywhere close to here. They are told, hey, you can get in on an operation that's going to bring you 15% ROI per year. You can buy in to this what they call REITs. You can get into this investment vehicle for real estate, and you're going to be guaranteed this kind of money. And so people get into it for greed's sake. And maybe some pension plans get into it. Maybe some folks who are just trying to save for retirement, but they get into it with the promise of an exorbitant promise. And they don't live anywhere around here. They might not even live in the United States at all. Maybe what we need to do is have some good old residential construction folks get a hold of some banks and to just make some property so people can live in it. And maybe we need to set up our tax structure so that makes sense. But we live in an age when, just a 3% return, which, used to be a lot of money, now is looked upon as chump change.
Right.
And that's not a good thing. And so, Minneapolis doesn't have all they have is the right for the council to write a policy. So I hope landlords get involved with tenant advocates to write a policy that allows them to attract investment, and a policy that allows them to have people live at an affordable price. This is an opportunity for a conversation, it seems to me.
We got about 10 more minutes, Keith, before you got to go. I wanted to see if you could do a sort of a recap on some of the highlights of your current administration. You've got a lot of things. I mean, you're pumping out not legislation, but actions on behalf of the state of Minnesota, left and right. Talk about some of the highlights that your team is doing right now.
Well, I'll tell you what my favorite highlight is. The one I like to talk about, and that is that the Minnesota Attorney General's office, for the first time ever, was recognized as a top workplace in the state of Minnesota. And so the Star Tribune has this survey, and people anonymously can nominate their workplace, and then there's a survey that goes to all the employees there, and if more than 80% respond positively, you can be designated as a positive workplace. So never before in the history of the AG's office has that happened. Now, some people listening might say, well, Keith, why would you say that's a good thing? Because I don't write the briefs and I don't make the arguments in the court. The lawyers who I supervise do that. If they feel good and they feel they work in an affirming work environment, then they're going to do great work for the people of this state. So I put a lot of time, energy, and resource into making sure we got excellent morale, fighting at the legislature to pay them more so that they will go out there and they will stop bad landlords, things like that. But you asked me like what I've been up to.
Before you go on, I was thinking about this. Your department is probably the largest law firm in Minnesota, correct or not? Am I right or wrong about that?
Well, we're one of the larger ones, but actually Dorsey and Whitney and a few others are bigger than us. Really?
Okay. I just was wondering, man, that's got a big team, big organization, and you got to be among the biggest, but we're
among the biggest. That's true.
Okay, great.
I'm basically the managing partner of one of the biggest law firms in the state of Minnesota.
Right.
And I'm certainly the managing partner of the biggest public law firm in Minnesota.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But one of the things we've done is that we have we've sued and are in the middle of resolving the opioid crisis lawsuits. We're returning millions and millions of dollars to Minnesota from the lawsuit we filed over suing the Sacklers and Purdue Pharma for their misrepresentation of their drugs. And let me tell you, we have 2 members of our staff at the AG's office who've lost their children to opioid addiction, but it's happened all over the state. And so we're wrapping that case up now. We fought really hard. We got the money, and now we're trying to get it distributed in a fair way. This was a campaign promise. One of the things I ran on is to fight the unfair pharmaceutical pricing. Mm-hmm. So we filed lawsuits in the antitrust field to stop price fixing for generic drugs. Also, we're suing over the insulin price jacking. We successfully sued CenturyLink. We successfully sued Comcast to make sure you get your internet service providers at a fair price at a reasonable service. Mm-hmm. Sued Frontier, same thing. We also resolve cases in the charities world to make sure that that there's no charities fraud. People who donate to charities should not have to worry about the money that they sent to help people going to weird places. So we do that. We field over 80,000 calls a year. We've been active in the criminal justice space. As everybody knows, we've been involved in assisting local governments criminally prosecute people who commit crimes like say Derek Chauvin, for example. Mm-hmm. But we've also set up a statewide expungement program to help give people a second chance. Mm-hmm. We've also set up an innocence project, which is called a conviction review unit, to try to make sure nobody who's innocent is locked behind bars in Minnesota. So we're busy. We're starting some programs that I really want to see succeed. Like, we're trying to do more in the area of prosecuting sex trafficking. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of missing and murdered indigenous women and women of color who get exploited. We're the AG's office. We're setting up a program to stop that. We basically shut down polluters like Northern Metals, where it used to operate on the north side. And we, a number of other environmental related cases. So we've been super busy, and I enjoy the work. I like it better than the job I used to have in the area of Congress, because it allows me to do more, do more on the ground work. Mm-hmm. We also, during the pandemic, there was a lot of price gouging going on. Mm-hmm. And so we brought cases against a company called Sparrow Farms, which was charging as much as 4 times more than the normal price for eggs. So we told them they couldn't do that. And, we're standing up for rights, man. Also Minnesota School of Business, Globe College, sued them, got $24 million in debt forgiveness and $16 million in restitution.
Wow.
That's
basically busting a scam.
Yeah, that's a scam. They said, hey, if you come go to our school, we'll help you get a loan from the federal government, but then we're going to offer you a degree in law enforcement. Only they were not authorized to offer degrees in law enforcement. Mm-hmm. So they're basically making you take on debt and get a certificate, which is absolutely, utterly useless, recognized by no one. And so we sued them for that and dealt with them on that. And, that's what we're going to do.
But I know you got to stop in 3 minutes. I want to respect that.
Sure.
I want to take the last seconds here to talk about your announcement that you're running for re-election. I am running for re-election. I'm running for re-election because there's a lot of work we got to get done, Al. Quite honestly, I don't believe that politicians should just sit in office and stay there for a lifetime. I was in Congress for 12 years and I left. I was in the State House for 4 years and then I left. And I'm only going to be in the Attorney General's office as long as I feel
that I'm making an important contribution. And I think that there's more work to be done, more work in the area of criminal to do, because we want to prosecute people who sex traffic women, more work in the area to get more expungements, more work to get innocence work done, more work to protect people's paychecks. Like our wage theft, we set up a wage theft unit. We got back over $250,000 in back wages in only our first year, and we're just getting started. So if your wages are getting ripped off, we're not going to stand around and let that happen. Protecting the environment. This is what we're doing. This is what the work is. It matters who's the attorney general. It matters who is the attorney general. And it's a job that I want to do. I enjoy doing it. And I hope the folks send me back for 4 more years, because, you know, we got a lot more work to do together.
Keith, I want to thank you so much. Thank you for all your work that you're doing. Thank you for your service as the Attorney General, and for your willingness to communicate to the people all the time here at Insight News and with Conversations with Al McFarlane. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Have a good day now.
Thank you so much. Okay, take care. I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. I'm hoping my next guests are going to be here in a second to follow up. I mentioned that, and here she is, Juana Sullivan Jansen. I mentioned that I think earlier this week I did a program that kind of walked down history lane on Insight News. I talked about and showed copies of the original Insight magazine from 1974. That's when I started Insight as a magazine, and talked about what was going on in my head as a Northside resident. I mentioned that where I'm sitting right now in my dining room over on Thomas Avenue in North Minneapolis is where we started Insight News. So I'm in the very exact same space right now that we began Insight News back in 74, then 76 as a newspaper. Well, one of the pivotal enhancements, improvements of our mission, our vision, was the partnership we had, the relationship we had with this phenomenal landmark institution in North Minneapolis called Lucille's Kitchen. We were around before the Plymouth Avenue shopping center was developed. That center was developed and included like a coast-to-coast a pharmacy, included a phone center, included a variety of businesses, a grocery store, a liquor store. You know, over time, some tenants came and some tenants went, but one of the ones that had a fairly long run there was a restaurant on the west end of the Plymouth Avenue Shopping Center, and that was called Lucille's Kitchen. Lucille Williams died recently. Juana Sullivan Jansen is her niece, and I've asked Juana to come on to help me commemorate the passing towards ancestorship of a dear friend and leader, a beloved person in our community, Lucille Williams. Juana, how are you?
I am hanging in there, Al, and honored to be able to share words about Lucille's life and the amazing legacy that she's left for the North Side and for the world.
Well, go ahead. Let's start talking about her. We hope that her brother Henry would join us. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to get with us or not.
Unfortunately, my dad, I wasn't able to reach him, so he won't be able to join us. You know, he and I have been talking a lot about Lucille's life and legacy in the last few months and about the restaurant. So I have my own opinions to share, but I guess I want to go on record as saying I'm speaking for myself. There's
Sure.
Her children are grieving right now and not quite ready for that public conversation, but I'm honored to be able to be here. So, you know, if I said anything about Lucille without starting with the fact that she was a part of this line of extraordinary female entrepreneurs, I would be in the wrong. And so what I want to say is that Lucille was an amazing home cook who turned her skills into Lucille's Kitchen because she was able to, right? And she was a part of this legacy of women who found ways to make money in any way that they could. And her mother, Ida Bell, was a great cook as well, who had this idea in her mind that you take it to the people. And so she would go and set up in these fields where Black people were working and cook food, fry fish on site with a gas stove. And so Lucille grew up in that tradition and really wanted to be an entrepreneur and had these dreams of opening a restaurant for most of her life, and was finally able to achieve that goal by retiring from her job as a hospital administrator and doing the second act in her life of opening this restaurant with my father, Henry, in North Minneapolis. And one of the things that I remember as a young woman is just watching her glow through that experience, and how people from all over the place came to that restaurant, and how the restaurant, through collaboration with you, for example, and National Public Radio and some other things, just became this space that was so needed in our community, a place where people could come and talk about the things that we don't always get a chance to talk about the environment, about public health, about politics, about heritage, about legacy. And all of these conversations I got to be a part of because Lucille was bold enough to leave her good paying job and try to cook food, try to bring those recipes of Louisiana to the folks of the North Side.
I remember the red beans and rice. I remember the fried alligator. Amazing. I've never had it before.
Now that might have been one of my dad's ideas. She wasn't all that fond of the fried alligator, but the gumbo.
It was a good idea. It was delicious. I love fried alligator, and I wouldn't have tried it ever if it hadn't been for Lucille's Kitchen. Yeah, the gumbo was awesome.
Yeah.
And it was a great menu. Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember, her smothered chicken was just, it was just glorious. And, in the Southern tradition, you pretty much serve everything with rice. And so if you can't get your gravy right, then you need to sit down. And so Lucille would do these specials with beef tips and rice with this rich, deep gravy that made you wanted to fight anybody who would ask for a bite. The crispy fried chicken, the catfish, the gumbo, the sweet potato pie. Oh my gosh, the pork chops. And see, y'all only knew half of it, right? Because there were all these dishes that she would cook for us as a family that didn't necessarily make it onto the menu at the restaurant. But she would make these stuffed pork chops that were just amazing. She also loved like New England boil, which was not something that she ever put on the menu at the restaurant. She loved chili. There were just all of these really kind of homey foods that would grace the family table that weren't a part of the restaurant. But the things that made onto the menu at the restaurant were the things that you would be willing to fight somebody to get a bite of.
Well, I loved, my story with Lucille's Kitchen, outside of just being one of the neighborhood people that celebrated the addition to that asset to our community. We used to have our staff at Insight News come up to Lucille's for our, meetings over lunch to discuss our editorial plan for the next week, right? So me and 3 staff people, or sometimes 4 or 5. And what we ended up doing is talking about, what's happening at Northside Residents Redevelopment Council, what's happening at Willard Homewood, what's happening with Pilot City, or North Point's called now, what's happening in 4th Ward, 5th Ward, just general things. And as we sit there and discuss those to come up with an idea of what the newspaper's coverage was going to be, what photographs we'd use, et cetera, we noticed that people at the next table would be listening up in our conversation, as they say. And so we kept doing that. And we said, you know what, pull a chair up. You got something to say? And people would pull their chairs up. We'd add more tables. And then over a fairly short period of time, a lot of people were at our table, sort of being part of this community planning process for the community newspaper, Insight News. So we said, let's reach out to KMLJ and see if we can do something that elevates us, takes it to another level, and make it an actual program. So instead of just a meeting with the editor every Monday or every Tuesday morning, let's bring it and open it for the community. And that's what we did. And I'm telling you, over a short period of time, the Public Policy Forum at Lucille's Kitchen became the home of public policy for Black Minnesota. This is where everybody who was talking about public policy had to go to be seen to say what he or she wanted to say about the public initiatives, the arts initiatives, the education initiatives of our community. Really amazing. I just remember some of the phenomenal shows. You mentioned the partnership with Star Tribune and NPR. We did a conference. We did two conferences that were international. We sent, we had the son of Stephen Biko, the South African freedom fighter, working with us on the ground in South Africa, both in Johannesburg and I think in Cape Town on the second occasion. And on one of the shows, he organized a number of human rights activists and commentators and journalists to talk about truth and reconciliation, to talk about it at the end of the Truth and Reconciliation hearings that had global attention coming out of the dismantling of apartheid in South Africa, right? And we had a group of lawyers and human rights activists at Lucille's Kitchen, and a direct link satellite conversation. It was amazing. And on another occasion, we had a connection with Cape Town, I believe, and the university, with physicians and educators, health professionals in South Africa, talking about the emergence of AIDS, HIV in South Africa. This was at a time when there was a denial. The public posture in the government of South Africa was one of denial. What we did is juxtaposed that experience in South Africa with the experience of the impact of AIDS, HIV, but also STDs and other sexually transmitted diseases, and even things like teen pregnancy, right here in 55411 in North Minneapolis, Ward 5. And so we talked about the fact that we had an epidemic actually going on in our community of people being unaware or being ill-advised or unadvised and engaging in practices that put themselves and others at risk. And so there was a need to create education, not only here, but there and globally within the Black world, the African diaspora. So that was important. We also sent our reporter, our editor, I think Grant Williams, to Berlin. He met with the people that were litigating the Jewish reparations movement against the government of Germany on the basis that the theft of life and labor and property of Jews by the state during World War II meant that the state owed reparations to the German Jews. And as we had that conversation, we had Randall Robinson in studio at Lucille's Kitchen talking about the book, The Debt, What America Owes to Black People, and that has reignited the discussion about reparations, what America owes to Black people by virtue of the theft of our labor, our lives, our property, and our opportunity under the state-sanctioned enterprise called slavery. So we've done important discussions there. I remember talking with Jesse Jackson on several occasions at Lucille's Kitchen for the program with Al Sharpton, Fairly Director Paul Wellstone, the mayors of both cities, the governors of Minnesota, the state senators, and neighborhood people, ordinary local folks who live around the corner, talking about what's happening in my block. So it was a great place to put us all together with each other.
Now, I want to say something about that, because people who didn't understand like the dynamic that was happening in that space might not get this. But for me, what was such a defining moment in history of Blackness in Minnesota was that not only were you helping those conversations to happen at Lucille's Kitchen, but people were eating traditional Southern and Black foods while that was happening. And so in the mind, it then was, I think, a shift that things that maybe were not uniquely Black, like reparations in Germany for Jewish people who'd been killed during the Holocaust, right? But we started to see the connections and to broaden our minds to reflect on the world in ways that we might not have done had those forums not been happening in that space. And so it was an opportunity to sit and eat a bowl of grits and talk about what it meant to be in solidarity, right, with people in South Africa who were having a hard time confronting the AIDS crisis that was happening. You could see that being mirrored in our own communities here in the US as well. And so for me, what was powerful was the forums, but then also how they had these ripple effects in raising the consciousness of people in our community and demanding something different of our leaders than we had done before. And the fact that Lucille's was at the ground level of making that happen, I think was something that was really important and something that Lucille was very proud of.
Significant, and so when I go to UROC now, which is the new resident tenant of that building and that space, renovated beautifully, but I always am feeling the remembrance, the energy from Lucille's Kitchen still at UROC, and I'm proud when I drive by UROC and seeing the parking lot full of cars. People there for evening meetings. Now that we're sort of getting a little bit beyond COVID-19, though we're in a spike right now today. But everything shut down for the past 18 months or so, and I think people are starting to come back. But what I loved about UROC before the pandemic, and what I think will happen after we are clear of that, is the feeling of driving by there and seeing the parking lot full at 7 in the evening or 6:30. That means 150 people are in meetings in different rooms in that feeling. And then you look on the other side of the street and you see the parking lot for the Minneapolis Urban League full.
Yes.
And you look through their windows and you see a number of neighbors and residents being with each other around the question of public policy. And then you look further to your left again, and back to the south, and you see this new building, this gorgeous building. We call it the Thor building now. Still, it's not that called, but that is a landmark. And we know that North Point Health and Wellness and NEDA, and I think Summit Academy and other institutions are in there. So we see all this activity happening, and we see the new Estes Funeral Home on that corner, and the new medical facility and social service facility about to be built on the other corner at Plymouth and Penn. All of this revitalization, reinvigoration, I think is important. And I think that the ideas, the energy, the insistence that emerged out of the conversations we had at Lucille's Kitchen are at the heart of this, I believe. So I'm so pleased and proud to have been part of that process.
Yeah. And I want to say, from my memories of Lucille's Kitchen and Aunt Lucille, is that she had one of the biggest hearts of anyone that I've ever known in my life. And so if she invited you into community with her, she would not turn away from you. And so I think part of that culture that was laid down. I worked at UROC for many years, right? I was working at the University of Minnesota when it was being developed, and left last year to go to the University of Minnesota as a full-time graduate student. And I, like you, when I was in that space, I could feel the legacy of love, of lifelong learning of continuing to be politically aware. And the good thing is that the people who helped UROC to come into existence knew they were people from the community, right, who had long-term connections. And so they knew about that legacy of place that had existed there. And so as they were creating UROC, they were doing so with a nod in true Sankofa fashion to the history of what that space had meant in the community before, and knew that it could be that again.
Let's take a step back and talk about you for a minute, Juana. You mentioned that you were at UROC and are at the university. What all are you working on right now? Take a minute and talk about what you're doing presently.
I think I learned how to reinvent myself from my Aunt Lucille. And I hadn't really thought about that until the last few years when I was looking for role models to figure out what to do next. When I came to UROC, I was a steadfast administrator. I'd worked as the director of another program at the university for many years and spent my career in public relations. And so when I started at UROC, I was in public relations, but then I had a minor in art. And there was this opportunity that came into existence there to become the very first curator for the gallery that they were creating. And so for, probably 9 of the 10 years that I worked there, I was the curator for UROC's gallery. And so I got to build community and lift up that other work that they were trying to do in practice with the community in the art gallery there. And over time, I started to realize that this is what I wanted to spend the rest of my life doing, both being a curator, but also as an artist. And so eventually I got the courage when my daughter went off to college to leave and to go to college myself. And so now I am in a program where I am learning how to be a public artist, which is such an interesting thing, because I think we had been doing it at UROC for quite some time, but perhaps we weren't using the same language that higher education was using, right? And so it is about building a practice that is inclusive of the community and inviting the community in, and not just saying, hey, I'm going to paint a mural, which is part of it, but also saying, perhaps we can paint a mural, or where should this mural go, right? But my work is mostly behavioral. So for example, I'm inviting people to tell me about what a particular place means to them. And then together we might figure out what's the appropriate art to commemorate this place. Right. Earlier, I guess about 2 years ago, I worked on a project in the Rondo neighborhood, because as an African-American in Minnesota, it's a place that I have a very strong connection to. And it was working with Chris Scott, who's a photographer, and Clarence White, who's a poet. And I'm also a poet. And together we photographed elders in the Rondo community and then took turns writing poems for them. And then we printed those photographs and poems onto lawn signs and installed them in the Martin Luther King Park with solar-powered lights, so that even in the middle of the night, you could walk through the park and read those stories and see those photographs. And for me, it was about reclaiming the land that had been lost for our community. And I remember pulling up and seeing it, all lit up one evening and bursting into tears, because I don't think I realized how important it was to me that I be a part of us not forgetting our heritage in Minnesota. And so that's the kind of work that I do now. It's usually about history, because that's what my undergraduate work was in, and about a way that we don't leave the community behind when we create stories.
Were you born here in Minneapolis, or
I was not actually born here. I moved here when I was about 6 months old, and then lived here for a while, and then moved back.
Where'd you guys come from?
Came from Shreveport, Louisiana, our whole family. And interestingly enough, there were 5 kids in our family. Lucille was the eldest, and all 5 kids relocated from Shreveport to Minneapolis.
Okay. And the reason I ask is that yesterday, I think it was yesterday, or I think Tuesday, I interviewed some people in the community had a great program, but they were talking about 6th Street. And you might not be familiar with 6th Street as a story, but I'm going to share this with you because this is right down your lane of engagement and opportunity. So 6th Street is actually Olson Memorial Highway.
Ah.
You wouldn't know it, but 6th Street had a life of its own dating back 150 years. And 6th Street from downtown to west to the city limits was a place that immigrants from Europe came first, the Jewish community, and then towards the 1880s and 90s, blacks started coming, and by the 1900s, a sizable black community was emerging, right? And of course, into the 18s and 19s and 20s, it ended up being these two communities, Sumner Olson Field and Glenwood Housing Community, both of which were so-called segregated, but public housing. They had the whites in one area, Jewish people in one area, and blacks in one area. Jews moved out, whites and blacks were there together. Then they relocated poor whites to other public housing, and that ended up being a black public housing unit for the Sumner Olson side that's south of Olson Highway. Now, Sumner Olson was north of Olson Highway, and then the Glenwood was Olson south to Glenwood. The point is, as I was interviewing them and learning about it, they said Olson Highway used to be pedestrian friendly. I can't imagine Olson Highway as a place that's friendly to pedestrians.
Yeah.
And like most people I know, I'm horrified when I drive up and down Olson Highway, which I do several times a day, and I see children or elders or anybody trying to walk across because it's dangerous.
Yes.
At one point in time, however, people were able to walk back and forth, and there were businesses. So the question is, how do we reclaim, like Rondo, what that community might have been and what it could be? Could it be made into something that is pedestrian friendly, bicycle friendly, commerce friendly? Does it need to be an 8-lane thoroughfare, 8-lane thoroughfare? Can it be reduced to 2 lanes each way once again? It used to be, right? And could businesses and entertainment and gathering spaces line Olson, or could it be renamed 6th Street? At the base of 6th Street were a number of businesses that Black people owned and ran and made money on. It was an entertainment hub, nightlife, street life, but it was a place where Count Basie and Cab Calloway and all of the greats came and performed and played. And if they played somewhere like out in St. Louis Park, when they were done playing there at midnight, they came down to 6th Street and hung out in the community. And that was a place, and they stayed back in those days at places like Phyllis Wheatley, which was a boarding house that they couldn't stay in hotels downtown, right? So all this stuff happened and we forget it. And unless we attach value to our memory and our experiences and memories get blown away like dust, have no value. And if we don't do it, it won't be done. That's why I really love what you're doing in the realm of public art and expressing our identity, our culture, looking at the Sankofa experience, where we've come from, as a way to guide us towards a future that celebrates our glory. That's what I think you're doing. What do you think?
Now, let me tell you about 2 things. One is I was one of 3 artists of African descent who redesigned the Dale Street Bridge through the Rondo neighborhood. And the reason that that happened was because it needed to be torn down, right?
Mhm.
But it was over the Interstate 94, and it was unconscionable how little consideration the original project had paid to the community that it had destroyed.
Mhm.
And so Seytu Jones, who's been a longtime mentor of ours, said they was invited, I think, to redesign the bridge. And he said, this is an opportunity for you to build a legacy by the next generation of artists in this neighborhood doing this work. And so I applied and was selected as one of the artists on that project. And so if you go over and take a look at that bridge now, you see how it honors what was there before.
Mhm.
And you see how you can reclaim the legacy of a place.
Mhm.
I also did another project this past summer that's called Free the Deeds. And it was inviting people to look at the deeds on their homes and
Mhm.
see if there were still racial covenants on them. Because while they're no longer enforceable, most people didn't ever bother to go and request that it be removed. And the trauma of purchasing a home and then getting the deed and then seeing that it still says that, Black people can't live in this neighborhood is one that we want to resolve. And so for that project, I interviewed 2 early African-American families
Mhm.
and talked about their experiences in housing. And so Dan Bergen at PBS
Mhm.
recorded those interviews, and they'll be airing on PBS soon. Those 2 stories, one was a South Side family and one was a North Side family. And they both talked about how different their experiences were in those 2 different communities. The North Side family, similar to my family where they all moved up here,
Mhm.
the woman talked about as a child being able to go up and down these streets, and she had family in every block for
Mhm.
miles.
Wow.
And how transformational that was for her about because her family had come from the Deep South.
Mhm.
The South Minneapolis person, though, talked about using the back door instead of the front door of their own home because they did not want to have to deal with the prying eyes of their white neighbors, some of whom had organized petitions to try to get them bought out of the house before they even moved in.
Right.
And so we cannot forget that astounding legacy that we're here on the foundation of people who had to fight every day just to own a home. And so why would we want to forget that and on this journey that we're on?
I want to thank you so much. What a wonderful conversation, wonderful comments, and thank you for the work you're doing. Again, with the rest of our community, I join you and your family in applauding your aunt Lucille Williams, the with your dad, the creators of Lucille's Kitchen in North Minneapolis, and as a business owner and beneficiary of the relationship. I want to thank you. And on behalf of the community, say we celebrate her passing to ancestorship. We think about her, we carry her in our hearts. We know she stays with us. Listen, I want to keep this conversation with you going. Maybe we can get Seytu on. And I want to connect you with Kinani Aden is her name, I think. Kinani Omar
Mm.
is the activist organizer with Harrison Neighborhood Association, but you and her are talking the same language exactly. And
Excellent.
you're talking about power, about the power to be ourselves. And
Yeah.
this is what liberation looks like and sounds like. And so I want to put you guys together to grow this conversation out. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. We'll see you. Bye-bye. I'm Al McFarlane.